As a kid in the early 1990s, I remember being on holiday in Weymouth at a Haven Holidays Park, and I recall a good few people crowded around an arcade machine. Of course, at this point, Golden Axe was a good few years old, but the machine was still standing proud. Two kids were defeating their father on the final stage, and this warranted many to crowd around and watch the end screens, as well as myself. I would play this on the C64 back in the day, and later on the Sega Master System and my brother's Sega Mega Drive. Golden Axe has had a few sequels and spin-offs, including Axe Battler on the Game Gear, as well as a so-called reboot during the PS3 era, which epically failed. Today's video is a celebration of one of arcade's best beat-em-ups of all time. This video is going to explore the very worst, best ports, which were available during these old systems commercial years. I'll also note here that just like my other videos in this series, I aim to set these between 10 to 15 minutes long in length. If there is a missing port, I truly do apologise. Anyway, let's rock on. First up, we've got the Amstrad CPC. Now, although there is much worse in terms of arcade conversions on this miracle 8-bit Amstrad CPC, this version of Golden Axe just isn't much fun at all. More frustrating more than anything. Firstly, sprites are way too fast and collision detection is very much off, where it is so difficult to attack enemies. They seem to get the better of you most of the time rather than you getting the better of them. In typical CPC fashion, we get those nice vibrant contrasty colours, but for Golden Axe it is just a little far too bright. Each character is playable, just like most of the other computer ports in this list. To jump requires pressing up on D-pad and very quickly pressing the action button. As I have been going through this ports series, I actually had low expectations for the ZX Spectrum conversion of Golden Axe. I was actually really surprised with how good it was, considering this computer was at this point 8 years old, and Sinclair Research had no idea that people would later use a computer to produce games to this caliber all of this time later. Firstly, there is no music, just some pretty average sound effects, which is more than acceptable for a specky game. Another thing that I did notice was no clear colour clash. For example, as I played as Tyrish Flare, I noticed that the background wasn't displaying on her, which tells me this game was programmed by a very talented coder back in the day. Controller wise, it controls fairly well with collision detection that is mediocre. Nothing to brag about. It is also a fairly tough version of Golden Axe. This is a game I would play on my Commodore 64 back in the day. At the time I was more than happy playing this, although a little tough compared with other versions in this list. This was good, if not decent attempt by Virgin Games when they released this back in 1990. I had the Tronics release of this. Now, out of all versions of Golden Axe, I'll personally say that the music produced by Jerome Tell for this version is by far the very best, if not underrated. I am an absolute sucker for synth music and love the power of the SIDS chip. Music wise, you can choose between music or sound effects, which is acceptable for a game like this on C64. Gameplay wise, like I say, although a little tough, the collision detection is very slightly off, and to jump means an odd controller combination, just like other versions of pressing up and fire simultaneously. The game tends to stick with a particular colour and use different shades of it. For example, lots of browns are used. It's not particularly the ugliest conversion. I'm pretty sure that one goes to Final Fight on the C64. The strange thing with the Sega Master System's version of Golden Axe is that the only character we can play with is Tarek. Although you do have 3 options of magic to choose from before the game begins, very annoying for fans of the other characters in the game. Firstly, the quality of this conversion isn't that special. We will notice the game lags and stutters. Characters also appear to be very much the same as they walk and run around on screen. The stuttering is also irritating as the sprites move very quickly in this version. I owned this one back in the day for my Master System too, but didn't really realise how bad it was up until recently. I have seen much better on the Sega's 8-bit console. Collision detection is fairly bad too with this version. Just seems that the weapon you are using don't seem long enough to have a good aim of attacking enemies. If I had to choose something good from the Master System's version, I would likely say the colour palette used isn't that bad. Now, the Atari ST version of Golden Axe isn't too wonderful. Firstly, and most annoyingly, every now and again when scrolling, the game will pause for a few seconds to load a little bit more from the disc, which happened several times during my playthrough of the first stage, which was the wilderness. Secondly, collision detection is way off in this version. Music-wise, for a 16-bit microgame, it kind of sounds just like an 8-bit version. Although the sound effects are fairly good with this port, the music is pretty bad. I think that the color palette used for the Atari ST's version appears to be just a little bit too bright, but that's just me. Overall, not particularly a great conversion over on the Atari ST. There is much better to come in this list. Now, optimistically, I fired up this Japanese PC Engine CD port of Golden Axe. Was really impressed with the presentation of it. A slick new look, really. The sound was different to the usual, and the character selection screen looked a little like something from Streets of Rages. The score in hand selection screen is gone in this version. The game opens up with a nice introduction too. Then the game begins, and I am slightly underwhelmed. Okay, sure, at the end of the day, this is still a game version from 1990. But still, there were other versions much better than this released in 1990. The issue with this game is firstly an odd level of difficulty. Enemies seem very easy to defeat. Not much effort is involved, and it randomly bumps up 100% when you're not expecting it. Almost like this was purposely done to catch the player off guard. I'm not really sure. The characters themselves also seem to walk at a seriously fast pace, unlike other versions here in this video. Is this a good port? Well, it is cut above the previous versions I have covered so far, but definitely not a perfect version at all. This Japanese portable produced a very good version of Golden Axe, which is very colourful and detailed for the sprites in really nice backdrops, complemented with a very nice soundtrack with added sound effects. It originally released in 2002, so at this point around 13 years have passed since the original arcade release, and just went to show how loved this classic was even at this point. It's a fairly nice game to control, but did find this port extremely difficult to play. Difficulty level have truly ramped up 100% with this Bandai WonderSwan color version. If you can, give this one a go. It's likely you haven't played this version or even knew about the WonderSwan color portable. You can also choose between any three of the original characters too with this version of the game. Providing you had a good IBM or PC compatible computer back in the day, you had a fairly good conversion of Golden Axe. This is running through DOSBox and was set to output through VGA at 256 colours. As you can see in the footage, it really doesn't look bad like some other DOS conversions that I have covered so far in this series. You will see some screen flicker, and this is likely down to disk image that I was using. Controller wise, this isn't too bad. It tended to be very slightly delayed. Color wise looks very nice. It's not too bright and not too dull either. Nicely added music with sound effects which works together whilst playing the game. Although the music did sound a little distorted at times. Collision detection isn't perfect, but there have been much worse on this list so far. Now, for owners of the Commodore Amiga 500 back in 1990, you would have rejoiced that you finally owned a fairly decent arcade conversion. This version is a faithful port, which a lot of care and attention went into by Virgin back in 1990. So what made this port so good? Well, firstly, as much as the arcade game is a classic undeniably, the Amiga version is ever so slightly faster. For example, when Julius Thunderhead, who I was playing as in this version, got hit down, it just seems just that little bit quicker to get back up and get back into the game. Enemies also appear to walk and run a little faster too, but not too much faster to the point which other versions of this list has had. Music and sound effects was also added without the need of selecting here just one of these. All three characters are playable in this version too, and casting magic spells also looks really cool with this version. Visually, the game looks really nice with a nice touch of perfect collision detection when hitting the baddies. So is the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis conversion of the 1989 arcade classic the definitive version of this game? I certainly think so. This is likely the version I played most of too on my brother's Sega Mega Drive 2 back in the day. Of course, each one of the characters is selectable, and of course the game is pretty much perfect in every way possible. Truly a Mega Drive classic, and most people at least own a standalone copy of this game on their Mega Drive, or at least had it on the Mega Games 2 compilation cartridge, which seemed as equally as common to own back in the day. First thing to mention here is clearly obvious. This game is on CD, and of course the music quality is much superior than its Mega Drive or Sega Genesis counterpart. When the Sega Arcade Classics collection was put together for the Mega CD or Sega CD, the games had some new audio treatments to go with them. The music for Golden Axe is actually from the arcade original. The voices used are redubbed as a higher quality too. You can also really hear the difference when enemies die in this version of Golden Axe. This is a great version, if not perfect version, which matches the source material very accurately. Colouring used including shades are amazing. Sprites look very nicely coloured too. Now in terms of putting the Mega CD in first place, it's a matter of choice really. Both this version and the previous Mega Drive or Genesis versions are virtually the same. The only difference is audio, and the point of this video is to determine the best and closest port next to the original. So anyways, that's it for today's Golden Axe ports video. This is actually the 10th video now in this series, and just remember, this is not an official list. This is my opinions in my personal ranking, so please be nice in the comments, as you normally are anyway. Should I say any more? Anyways, thanks for watching.